English friends, they even didn't know that we were deported to Russia.
You didn't want to tell them because they wouldn't understand or they would laugh, so you just close yourself up.
West didn't want to know because the priority was to win the war, regardless of the price. You cannot blame them for that.
It would be fair for the Polish people who suffered so much to say that what was done was very wrong.
It's a history, it's important. One shouldn't hide the truth.
The Victory Parade in London. Britain celebrates the end of 6 years of horrific war. Polish soldiers who fought alongside their British and American allies are not invited to take part in the parade.
Victory Parade, Victory Parade, we didn't treat it as a victory parade. Of course, I don't even think that we are so much offended that Poles were not invited. At that time I was in Scotland and it was not a victory for us.
Churchill said in the House of Commons, "The fate of Poland seems to be an unending tragedy, and we, who went to war all ill-prepared on her behalf, watch with sorrow the strange outcome of our endeavours." The strange outcome of the war, as Churchill put it, was that Polish troops and their families had no homes to go back to. They had to build up their lives anew, scattered around the world. Over 110,000 people making their home in Britain. However, the reasons for this displacement are known in the West only to a very few. Not many people know that just 5 years earlier, most of the recruits to the Polish army were emaciated, exhausted, and bedraggled. Like General Rakowski, the future hero of the Battle for Monte Cassino. This is the story of their forgotten odyssey. September the 1st, 1939, is known as the day of Hitler's attack on Poland, the day that triggered off the Second World War. The date September the 17th, 1939, is not so well remembered in the West. It was then that Poland suffered another blow. Soviet Russia, her other neighbor, attacked her unexpectedly from the east. This was a direct result of the secret protocol attached to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, in which Germany and Russia divided Poland between themselves, to all intents and purposes, forever. Edmund Majewski was a 16-year-old cadet officer.
1939, it was a terrible year. First, the Germans invaded us in September, 1st of September, from the west, and then on 17th September, barely 2 weeks later, Russian hordes came in from the east. The Russians were quite cunning. They were presenting themselves as friends of people.
The invasion itself is mentioned in Western history books, but its consequences, until now, have been consigned by history to oblivion. Czesław Zichrowicz was 14 when he was deported.
For me, the war, it was 2 days of invasion of Russian tanks. Day and night, they were coming through our village, and our world just vanished.
Having occupied half of the Polish territory, the Soviets sought systematically to eliminate the Polish nation. To crush possible resistance, they arrested all the Polish officers they could find, whether serving or in reserve. At one stroke, Stalin was destroying the flower of Polish intelligentsia, professors, scientists, doctors, and artists. Dorota Lewina remembers the last moments with her father.
One night in December, unexpected, they came to our flat and arrested my father. My father, ex-artillery officer in reserve, was intending really to leave Poland and join the army in the West. Everything was repaired when he was suddenly arrested. In this night, there were 200 ex-officers arrested.
They were sent to 3 detention camps. News from them arrived sporadically until April 1940. Then, a disturbing silence. The Soviets now turned to the officers' families and the rest of the middle classes, as well as shop owners and landowners. Soon even whole villages were arrested for refusing to accept Soviet citizenship. No one was spared. All were taken and given just half an hour to pack their possessions. Halina Zhivushko was 13.
My sister had flu and they came to take us away. My mother was begging them to let her stay behind. She was worried about her. But the Russians didn't want to hear.
Around 1.7 million inhabitants of eastern Poland, not only Poles but also Jews, Belarusians and Ukrainians, were deported to the depths of Russia, into the unknown. Their only crime? They were Polish citizens. Janina Jorkiewicz, then 13, vividly remembers leaving Poland.
It was only at the station that we saw the full extent of the tragedy of our people. There were several sets of goods trains. Voices, questions and shouts were coming from inside. After some time, the train started, and there was a great outpouring of the hymn, "We will not abandon our land," coming from all the trains. Everyone was crying, everyone was singing.
The conditions in the train were inhuman.
In just normal cattle train, 60 to 70 people were pushed into one compartment. Of course, there were no beds. In the middle of that wagon, there was a cast iron stove, and that's all what there was. There was no toilet. There was one opening little hole.
Anna Moszczynska was then a 21-year-old.
In the first week, they didn't even open the wagon. At once, you lost all your sense of dignity. You became cattle, because all the physical needs had to be dealt with in front of other people. Only after a week, they threw us a bucket of some gruel.
10-year-old Janina Kwiatkowska's journey started tragically.
On the way, my grandmother died. They threw her out into a ditch, and the train went on.
Several of people died because it was very cold. We were given very little food, some fish, and occasionally water. We had to melt the snow.
Bizarrely, this macabre journey had its ironic moments.
We were crossing the Volga River. At 4 in the morning, we see some glaring lights, the train stops, we ask what's happening. There are floodlights, illuminations, some kind of a fairy tale country. They unbolt the wagon and tell us, "Look, we are crossing the most beautiful bridge in the world." So they are carrying us to Siberia and still doing their publicity. We were traveling for a whole month from February the 10th until March the 8th. They unloaded us in the Irkutsk region, and that's where our life as the Soviet citizens of the second category, as they called us, began. We had to work, but we had no privileges. We were put in barracks and sent off to work.
Nie mieliśmy żadnych przywilei. Umieścili nas w barakach i na roboty.
Those who had been detained in the first waves of arrests in 1939 and early 1940 were put in prison. After months of interrogation, they were sentenced on trumped-up charges and sent to corrective labor camps. Edmund Majewski was sentenced to 5 years of forced labor.
Definition of hell by Sartre is if you are locked up with people whom you don't wish to be with. Well, that was 1,000 times hell because you were locked up with 1,000 people whom you don't wish to be with, because they were mostly Russian criminals. There were, of course, maybe 25% of good people, but they were mostly terrorized.
Stanisław Żurakovsky, a teenage cadet officer, was taken to Darembar.
From there,